So I want to talk about the future of VR, and I want to talk about why I personally don't think VR is ever going to become mainstream. Now, this video may age extremely bad, but the thing is, I personally don't believe VR is going to become mainstream as big as game consoles or anything like that. I personally don't think we're going to see big numbers when it comes to how many units sold and how many games have sold on VR. I still think it's a niche thing, and I still think it'll be like that for quite some time. It could change in the future, but right now I just don't see that happening anytime soon. I don't think we'll see really big numbers or anything too crazy that most people are going to be playing VR. I still think it's for a small community of people who really enjoy VR. That being said, I think everyone should give VR a chance, because if you haven't tried VR is definitely a different experience than playing games on a flat screen. Until you actually try it, you won't know if it's for you. That's one of the big problems with VR as well. It's not going to be for everybody. Some people may experience things like motion sickness. They may get a headache. It may just be uncomfortable for them. There's a number of different things that may make you not want to play VR, so it's going to be really hard to tell. But at least if you never tried it, you should definitely try VR, because again, like I said, it is a different experience than playing games on a flat screen if you never tried it. And I have actually been using VR headsets for quite some time now. I actually own two here. I own the first PSVR, and I thought this thing was incredible for what it is. Sure, it aged pretty badly considering the technology that's used behind this thing. For one, it is a headset that does have a lot of cables. That's the number one complaint with people who play this thing. This one is extremely bad when it comes to setup, at least, and I don't think anyone's going to deny that. It also has a really big breakout box. You had to plug into the PS4 system with like 10 wires coming out of it plugged in to the PS4, and on top of that, it doesn't have inside-out tracking, so you need an extra camera to put in your room to actually use the thing. And then more recently, in the last couple of years, I did actually pick up the MetaQuest 2. Here is the MetaQuest 2 right here, and this thing is still a modern-day VR headset. They're still supporting this thing. They're still updating this thing. They're also still putting games on this thing and giving software to this thing. This is one of the best, if not the best, selling VR headset without a doubt. And I can see why that is the case if you consider that this thing is the cheapest way to get into VR completely. And it's also the easiest way to play VR without a doubt. So that's why this thing probably sells like hotcakes. Honestly, if it wasn't for Facebook or Oculus or Meta actually pushing this thing or actually developing this thing in the first place, the Quest line of VR headsets, honestly, I don't think VR would be as nearly as popular as it is today. This thing really broke grounds when it comes to how accessible VR is in the first place. No one's going to deny that. Things like the PSVR are nice, and things like PCVR are better in some situations, in some cases, like for instance, the PSVR 2. But the thing is, they're just not as accessible to the mainstream audience or even casual gamers or people who just want to try VR for the first time, mainly due to the fact that these things are very expensive to begin with. And most other headsets on the market, you have to buy the headset, which is pretty expensive to begin with. And then on top of that, you do need some type of rig to actually run it, whether it's the PS5 with the PSVR 2, or whether it's something like the Valve Index, where you actually need a PC to actually run that thing, and those can get well over $1,000 for the whole setup if we're talking the VR headset itself and talking about the PS5 or the PC you're going to need to actually run your VR headset. And that's really one big caveat of VR that really limits a lot of people from actually wanting to get into VR in the first place, is the fact that it is very expensive to begin with. And honestly, I totally understand that. It's just not for everybody due to that fact. And the thing that really sucks is it's going to be like that for a while, just due to the fact that the technology that's used to actually run VR is more complicated than something like a game console. So I can see why prices of VR headsets and things like that are actually going to be much more expensive than their console counterparts. But again, that's where Meta came in when it comes to the Quest. The Quest originally actually came out only at $299. Basically, when Quest made this, they wanted it to be the easiest way to get in VR in the first place. But the thing is that concept has kind of went down the drain if you think about it, just because they did raise the price of this thing, I think last year, and they raised it to $400 instead of $300. And I really wish this thing was still $300 because it would get way more people into VR. $400 is still really cheap considering if you look at other VR options on the market. This is still the cheapest way to get in VR, and it's also one of the best headsets on the market. Not only is it a standalone headset, it's also a headset that you can actually use on its own, or you can actually plug it into a PC if you didn't know that, and actually play anything on Steam that's Steam VR capable, which is actually pretty nice. So you're getting a 2-in-1 headset, a headset you can use on its own out of the box, or you can plug it into a PC if you want to. But yeah, this is still going to be one of the best options on the market, despite it being $400. But I really do think at that $400 price point, I really do think it's in an awkward situation, because you do have to realize as well, a lot of people who are looking at VR headsets are actually gamers as well, and it is kind of hard to justify that $400 price point, I guess, considering again that it is the cheapest way to get in VR, and it's also one of the best headsets on the market. Even though it is the cheapest VR headset on the market, don't let that fool you. It's still one of the best ones on the market, but considering it's $400, and a lot of people again who actually buy this thing are actually gamers, they do have a lot to consider. Would I rather buy a Nintendo Switch? Would I rather buy a PS4, PS5, one of the Xboxes? The Xbox Series S is only around $300 and even cheaper on sale, and a lot of times you can get that thing for under $200 if you really want to, or at least under $300 in a lot of situations. So you can see for sure that $400 is kind of on the edge of where people want to get this thing. And you do have to remember as well, VR is not as crazy as something like a regular game console or like a regular PC where you have tons of games at your disposal. And then you do have to remember as well, like I said before, the biggest thing VR has is if you never played it, you don't know if it's going to be for you. It's just something that's not the greatest. So you can see those two are the biggest limitations. One, the price points in general, and then the fact too is it's not going to be for everybody, just because you don't know if you're going to like the tech to begin with. And then another thing that does suck about VR, which is a thing that I think is going to be around for quite some time, unless they can get the technology more smaller, like a pair of glasses or something like that, is going to be the fact that VR as a whole is not as good to play. What I mean by that is I actually mean it's not as relaxing to play as something like a game console or something like a PC. You can't just come home, sit down, and start playing it and relax. There's a lot of things that make it not as relaxing. So I think in turn that's going to make a lot of people not want to buy VR, and it's not going to be the way that a lot of people are going to want a game, because a lot of times you don't want to put on this clunky headset on your face. It gets foggy, it gets very steamy in here. Also, it weighs down on your face. That's also another thing that's bad, at least with the current VR headsets. A lot of them just aren't as comfortable as you would like them, and also you can't do everything while you're playing VR. You can't use your phone, you can't eat, you can't do a lot of things like go to the bathroom really well. You most likely have to take off the headset and then put it back on, and there's a lot of limitations to that, unlike a regular flat screen game. And I think that's going to keep a lot of people away from VR to begin with, unless the technology gets better and things like that. But overall, that is something to take in consideration. But another thing that's really big about VR, or not really big about VR, which is something I think a lot of people will agree on, is the fact the game selection on these things aren't better than something like a gaming console or like a PC if you're playing games on Steam. And the thing is, the one sad truth about VR headsets is the fact that we still don't have that one game that blows people's minds, kind of like game consoles. I remember when the Nintendo Switch first came out back in 2017, Breath of the Wild was extremely big. There were people I knew who were even playing Breath of the Wild who weren't even gamers to begin with. That shows you the power of Zelda and Breath of the Wild and the Nintendo brand as a whole. That thing was actually selling units, and it was insane. But like I said again, there's no real big game on VR that's going to make people want to go out and buy VR if they never picked up VR to begin with, which is the same. A lot of the time with most of these headsets, including the brand new PSVR 2 headsets, one of the biggest limitations is actually going to be the fact that a lot of these games aren't really AAA big blockbuster games that you would normally see on a console. A lot of these games are little like games where you only play for a little while, especially the Quest itself. Granted, this is running mobile hardware. It's not running regular PC specs or even gaming console specs. This is mobile hardware, but even so, the PSVR 2 doesn't have a lot of amazing games that are mind-blowing and so great. A lot of those games are actually ports of Quest 2 games, which is actually very interesting. And a lot of the experiences you are going to get on VR are going to be much more smaller, and they're not really going to take up your time, and they're not games you're really going to want to return to on a regular basis. They're not games you're going to get synced into for hundreds of hours when it comes to VR in general. Sure, there are games that are like that, but for a lot of games, it's not that way, and a lot of people agree with that. A lot of games, honestly, unfortunately, I can't admit this after using this for so long, I can't admit a lot of games on this really do feel like tech demos, little mobile games, little games you just mess around with for a little while. I guess on the bright side, there is actually games on here that do cost significantly less than things like regular console and PC games. A lot of the games mostly go for around 30 and under for the most part, unless you get some long game or some game that's trying to be more of like a AAA game. Then games usually cost $40 at most, but most VR experiences on here are going to be dirt cheap, $24 or $25, $30. But I guess the quality of the games really reflects the price and things like that. But yeah, it's just a shame we don't have anything that's going to be too crazy. Even the best of the best, like Half-Life Alyx, or like a Resident Evil 8 on the PSVR 2 or Gran Turismo 7 is not enough, I don't think, to get everyone invested in the VR. It's not something, again, like the Nintendo Switch, where when Breath of the Wild came out or Animal Crossing came out, everyone was playing it for the most part. That's just not how it is with VR, considering VR is still a niche thing. And honestly, I still think VR is going to be a niche thing or a niche thing for quite some time. I don't think it's going to take over the industry, which is kind of a shame. To be honest, I really wish it would take off more, because since these are just like a side project for a lot of developers don't want to actually put resources into VR games. And honestly, I don't blame them, because if you put a game on VR, you know, no matter what, your game's not going to sell crazy numbers. It'll still sell pretty good, especially since there is still a pretty nice community of people like me who do support VR and love VR as an actual thing. But I don't think there's enough people compared to game consoles or PC gaming that your game's going to sell millions of copies. I don't even think the best-selling VR game is going to sell like 40, 50 million copies on any given day, even if you made the best VR game, because the audience is just not there. Like I said, there's just too many limitations. And yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about VR. I still think VR is great. I'm glad companies are still supporting VR. I love VR. I love playing VR. The experiences are different. I still love VR, and I am a full supporter of VR. It's just the same right now. I don't think VR is going to become mainstream, and I don't think it'll ever become mainstream, at least not right now. There's just too many limitations with VR, which makes it not really a viable option for a lot of people, and especially since the numbers aren't the same as like a game console or something. A lot of devs, again, aren't going to want to put games on VR to begin with, because they know the numbers are going to be lower, which is just a sad truth of the sad truth. But I guess the nice thing is companies are still supporting VR, and there's still enough passionate people around the industry who love VR that VR is still not dead, and VR is still going to be ticking for many, many years to come. I just wish more people would find a way to make it more accessible, and also not just that, make more games for it, and make that one big game. All we need is that one big game to really make VR take off and blow up like a game console, but I honestly just don't see it, and that's the sad truth of the reality. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne signing out.